And God said to me, here's the problem. You guys in the church can be so hypocritical. He said, in the African-American church, you really got to be careful. I said, what do you mean? He said, because you are guilty of condemning the Supreme Court system and preaching against something. But if you look at half of our choirs, and a great number of our artists that we call abominations and we call demons, we demonize and dehumanize the same people that we use, and we don't say nothing about the gay choir director because he's good for business. As long as the choir sound good, I ain't saying nothing about his sexuality. We have done what the slave master did to us: dehumanize us, degrade us, demonize us, but then use them for our advantage. It's hypocritical to talk about the Supreme Court and calling them Sodom and Gomorrah, which is not what it's all about. But if that's the case, half our churches have been Sodom and Gomorrah for 100 years. He told me, boy, you got to re-examine yourself. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, on one hand, you quote homosexuality is an abomination from Leviticus. But you say that right after you ate some shrimp, some catfish, and some lobster. You quote Leviticus while you're wearing a wool blend suit. It's also in Leviticus that you shouldn't wear mixed linens. It's in Leviticus that if your wife is on her cycle, that you shouldn't go in the same house with her or even sleep on the same bed with her. That's in Leviticus too. Here's my point. We pick and choose the scriptures that we want to use to beat folk up with, rather than look at our own lives. Let me tell you something. If God wanted to judge America, he wouldn't need the Supreme Court system. If he wanted to judge America because of sin, he would judge me in '88 at the Freaknik in Atlanta. Y'all ain't saying nothing to me. Look at your neighbor and tell your neighbor, I don't condemn you, I don't judge you, I'm gonna preach Christ to you. Because you can't evangelize and antagonize at the same time. You cannot insult and inspire the same people that you insult. I thank God that Jesus went to Samaria with a woman who had some sexual identity problems and didn't preach condemnation. He just preached Christ. And our greatest missionary opportunity is going to be finding those who may be struggling to say, I'm not better than you, but the same grace that saved me, the same blood that let me come, is the same blood that you're going to need.
Yeah, in July of 2015, I was invited to preach at a Holy Convocation for a Pentecostal denomination. And after preaching the morning session, we had lunch. And a few of the pastors, and some of whom were professors at Howard University, were having a conversation about the Marriage Equality Act that then President Obama had signed in June of 2015. And they were questioning how was the church to respond. They also talked about the decline that their organization was experiencing and how they really felt that maybe this was an opportunity in their estimation to have conversations that included the LGBT community. And for them, it was important to reach out, and they wanted to evangelize, and they saw it as an opportunity to do missions in the missions field, which was the conversation. And because they didn't know how to address that topic. So it was not a subject that I brought up. It was a subject that they were talking about at lunch, some of the things they were doing at Howard University. And so that night I preached a message called Some Blessings in Disguise from the book of Acts. And one of the points that I was trying to make was based on their conversation, that sometimes we can't win people because we lead from a place of judgment. And the point that I made, very simply, to try to help water that conversation, was that when Philip went to the city of Samaria, Samaria had historically been a paganistic, a polytheistic, and a pantheistic place. People had not accepted Christ since the woman at the well in John 4. And I talked about how leading with the Christ ethic, and even if you believed that persons of the LGBT community were doomed or condemned, that we should not look at them from a place of demonization. That so often we demonize people rather than humanize people. And I talked about how Philip was effective in Samaria because he led with Christ. And Christ made the difference in Samaria. Not judgment, not philosophical ideology, but he just preached Jesus. And so the point that I was trying to make was that we sometimes want to antagonize rather than evangelize. And so the whole point was not about condoning or condemning. It was about seeing the humanity in all people. That even if somebody has a philosophical presupposition and theology that same-sex marriage, same-sex relationships are sin, I still believe that Christ makes the difference. And we really can't engage in conversations about homosexuality because often we haven't really talked about sexuality. But from a real perspective, we tend to not see the humanity and the imago Dei in all people. And so my point was that we all need Jesus. I talked about how, people were saying that because of that Marriage Equality Act, God was going to judge the world. And God was going to judge America because of President's signing of the Marriage Equality Act. And my response to that was, if God didn't judge America for the transatlantic slave trade, if God didn't judge America for the Middle Passage, if God didn't judge America for Plessy versus Ferguson, if God didn't judge America for the treatment of the Native Americans, if God didn't judge America for Africans fighting in every war that this country has ever participated in, while at the same time not having the freedoms that this country offers, if God had not judged America for its treatment of women, thus necessitating the suffrage movement and the rise of Susan B. Anthony, if God didn't judge America for Plessy versus Ferguson, a separate but equal, if God didn't judge America for 3/5 humanity being given to all Africans, then why would not God judge? Why would this be the reason why God would judge America? And so that was the whole context. And the whole idea was, in the church, we don't see the value in all communities. And no matter what your belief is, we're all made in the image of God. Then I went a step further to say that if God didn't judge America for how I acted in 1989 at the Freaknik, it was enough sin committed in 1989 at the Freaknik that every citizen, all 300 million of us, should have been judged. And if God was going to judge America because of sin, then it would have started at my door, and I'm not alone. And so I think too often in church, we categorize those things that we think are socially tolerable. And the whole point was, you can't evangelize and antagonize at the same time. So that was a 5-minute clip application of that third point of that message. Somebody posted it and went viral, and people have given all types of theses, and it's been discussed in seminaries for the last 10 years. That sermon still has viral wings. And I just believe that we have to make some apologies, because some of the things we have preached, some of the things that I even preached early on, attacking certain communities. Some people attack certain communities all the time because a lot of times they're guilty of that which they attack. Others of us attack specific communities. If you are not familiar with it, it's not your context. We love often to talk about that which we don't do. And so at the end of the day, I think we need to identify those we've hurt with harmful rhetoric in the name of Jesus. Because often it's easy to communicate the name Jesus, but we don't demonstrate the nature of Jesus. So that sermon 10 years ago, I still stand by it, that we all need Jesus. And the same grace that saved me, same grace that saved a fornicator or an adulterer, the same grace that'll save everybody else. I think we love to have grace for ourselves while giving the law to others. And so I still believe that Christ makes the difference, not our judgment, judgment is a horrible evangelism strategy. Well, I think, when people talk about the Marriage Equality Act, I was talking to one of the bishops at the time, and I said to him, there's a difference between personal theology and public policy. A lot of people don't listen to that because they are so emotionally triggered with their spirituality, sometimes toxic, that they don't think. We live in America, and as citizens of America, the American Constitution guarantees its citizens two things, or several things, one of which is the freedom of religion. Number two, the freedom from religion. Contrary to popular belief, America is not a Christian nation. We try to say it was founded on Christian principles. Tell that to Kunta Kinte. People say it was founded on Christian principles. Tell that to the millions who didn't make it here, whose bodies were thrown into the ocean. Really, America was more deist in perspective. Many of our founders were more ascribed to deism than they were Christianity. That's number one. Number two, the founders of our country, the forefathers, did not want the tyranny and the influence of religion because they realized the diabolical effects that religion could have on the state, coming from the Church of England and Anglicanism and so many other things. And so the challenge with that is realizing that every citizen of America does not have to believe what I believe, because Americans are guaranteed the freedom of religion and the freedom from religion. So as an American citizen, if I don't want to have a religion or faith, I have that right. If I am an American citizen, I can say I want to be an atheist, and I have that right. If, as an American citizen, I want to say I want to worship my dog and start woof woof ministries, as an American citizen, I have that right. Freedom of religion and freedom from religion. Now, the moment I said that, there are people who watch this, they go speaking in tongues. They go rebuking me. They go get the crucifix because they can't hear what I just said. As an American citizen, America is not run by the Bible. America is run by the U.S. Constitution. The job of our president, our leaders, in their oath, they have to uphold the U.S. Constitution. In America, you can be a Muslim and read the Quran. In America, you can be a Jew and read the Torah. That is our right as an American citizen. And so, as an American citizen, I realize that although I can believe that marriage is between a man and a woman, based on a Judeo-Christian context and origin, because of the Bible that I was taught and preached and thought was God's way of giving us life and understanding, that's my personal theology. That's not necessarily the basis of public policy. Now, the difference between personal theology and public policy. Most Christians who don't think, they want the entire world to think like them. This is not the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God is heaven. This is America. Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. And so the first thing I want to say to American citizens is, everybody does not have to believe what you believe. No matter how much you want to impose it or interject or center your experiences, your theology or your philosophical presuppositions onto somebody else, everybody does not have to believe what you believe. And so what the Marriage Equality Act did, whether you liked it or not, it was not something that was religious. What we say they co-opted marriage. You can believe what you want to believe. But it was a law that was passed for the citizens, that it was for same gender, people in the same gender relationship want to be married. That's what it gave them the right. Now, I can believe that marriage is between a man and a woman. That's my personal theology. What I understood about the Marriage Equality Act, that was not about theology for them. It was about public policy. And so for me, I can demonstrate my faith. I can teach my faith, but I'm not judge and jury. I believe what I want to believe. I think a part of the problem was that a lot of people who wanted to say that this Marriage Equality Act was something that was harming marriage, some of those same politicians have been married 3 or 4 times, some of which left their wives when they had cancer, and some of whom married their own cousins. So to me, it was the epitome and the apex of hypocrisy to suggest that this as an act of public policy. The second thing I want to say is there's going to always be difficulty when you try to use personal theology as the basis of public policy. I said again, whenever you try to use personal theology as the basis of public policy, it's going to always be problematic. Number one, because America is not run by theology. It's run by the Constitution. But number two, when you try to use personal theology as the basis of public policy, here are the questions I have to ask you. Whose theology are you going to use? Are you going to use the theology of the slave masters who went and brought slaves from West Africa, some of them in the cruise ships that were named Jesus? Is that the theology you're going to use? Whose theology are you going to use? The ones when the Pilgrims came to these shores and the Native Americans were already here, and the Native Americans gave them love, and in response, the Pilgrims and those colonizers gave them hate and vitriol and took what belonged to them? That theology, the one that we celebrate on Thanksgiving, whose theology are you going to use? The theology of the preacher who would preach on Sunday and rape slaves Monday through Saturday? Whose theology are you going to use? The theology of the Southern Baptists who split from the Northern Baptists over the abolition of slavery? When the Northern Baptists said we want to eradicate slavery, we believe in freedom for all people, but the Southern Baptist says no way, Jose. Whose theology are you going to use? The theology that says that black people were cursed by God according to Genesis chapter 9, when Noah cursed his grandson Canaan to be a servant of servants? Whose theology are you going to use? The theology that believes to this day that women can't hold a leadership position because of their genital and genitalia area? Whose theology are you going to use? The theology that believes that black people are cursed by God? Whose theology are you going to use? The theology that says in 1964 through 68 in Virginia that it's illegal for a black man to marry a white woman or a white woman to marry a black man? Whose theology are you going to use? The Mormon theology, Catholic theology? Whose theology are you going to use? Because you're going to always have deviation with theology. And so when you try to use a theological construct for public policy for the entire world, whose theology? Are you going to use the theology of Nat Turner's slave masters or Nat Turner? They both prayed to the same God. The slave master told him to enslave the slaves. Nat Turner's God told him to kill the slave masters. So whose God are you going to believe? Whose theology are you going to use? The theology of James Cone, who believed that God has a liberation motif, or Gutierrez from Latin America? The theology of Howard Thurman, who believed that God is a God of the disinherited? Are you going to believe the theology of white supremacists who to this day still try to bring value out of slavery and suggest that slavery was a necessary providential good for Africans, who tried to humiliate black people to this day by suggesting that slavery was a blessing and a gift from God? Is that theology you're going to use? And so today, when you say that I want public policy to be based on personal theology, and so back to the Marriage Equality Act, so for me, I realize that I have a right to decide and choose the Bible and the faith that I have. For me, it's Christ. For me, Christ has made the difference. For me, I will extol it and proclaim it for the rest of my life. For me, I will stand and preach the unsearchable riches of God. For me, I still believe that Christ is the answer for the world today. For me, I believe that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believes on him. That's my personal policy. But there are Mormons who believe up to 50 years ago that blacks were cursed by God. Our skins were cursed. Our nose were cursed. Even the male genitals, Mormons said, was a curse by God. They said the elongation of a black man's genitals was a curse. I don't get offended. Thank God for the curse. Again, whose theology are you going to use? And so for me, I made the decision that if I don't want to marry a man, then I just won't marry a man. That's why I married a woman. That's what I believe. I will extol, I will preach, But I cannot use my personal theology as the basis of public policy for the entire world. So because I believe that marriage, that woman is the best thing ever happened to man, that's my personal theology. But my personal theology may not be the public policy for the world. And so I believe you let the wheat and tare grow up together. I believe we all have to stand before the judgment seat. God's gonna be our final judge. And so for me, the Marriage Equality Act was not about personal theology. It was an issue of public policy. That was for me. In 2015, I was blessed to preach a message each month about the fruit of the Spirit. In June of 15, something very weird happened, a couple things. Number one, that was the shooting there in Charleston, South Carolina, at Mother Emanuel, when Dylann Roof killed 9 people who attended a Bible study. And a few weeks later is when the Marriage Equality Act was signed. And I was talking about the importance of seeing the goodness in people, and how racism and how so many other ills in this world often were because we lack the fruit of the Spirit, which is love, and how we've got to have goodness and see the goodness in others, and love and joy and peace. And after preaching one of those messages in the month of June, I received an email from a member of the church who had not attended church at that time in about 8 months. And to my chagrin, I discovered back in October of 2014 that this young lady came to have her child dedicated. And we have dedication classes for parents before we would dedicate our children. These classes are not classes that I attend, our staff handles them. And this young lady was told in the class that we would not dedicate her child. And the reason why we not dedicate her child, because she was married, or in a relationship, she was married to a woman. I think they got married in Texas, not Texas, but some other state, and they had moved to Atlanta. She was a member of the church. I never met the young lady, but she was a part of our church, and they had adopted a child. Well, our team made the decision to let them know that Saturday that we could not dedicate the child. The dedication was the next day. Unbeknownst to me, the young lady had invited 30 of her family members who drove from Texas and Louisiana, even parts of Mississippi, to come to Atlanta for the child's dedication. No one ever mentioned to me what had taken place that previous October of 2014. When I got the email, it was the first time we dealt with that situation. And so I asked the question, what was our history of our church? And I realized that our history of our church had been interesting in these types of situations. Historically, our church would not even dedicate a child who was born to a single mother. That if that mother was not married, the church would not dedicate her child. And we've had to offer apologies. We've had to identify how many people have we wounded. Our church is almost 150 years old, and so at the time we were about 139 years old. I wonder how many people that we've wounded, how many single mothers or single fathers did we wound because our theology would not allow that child to be dedicated. And so we worked through some of those things my first few years here, so we believe in dedicating any child, whether the mother is married or single. But this was the first time when a same gendered relationship was involved. And when I got the email, I talked to our leadership to realize I believe something was wrong. I didn't feel at peace. When I had to ask myself, am I looking through this through a bibliocentric lens? If a child was brought to Jesus to be blessed and to be prayed for, had to sit with it, how would Jesus respond to that child? And so I read scriptures and I saw, what did Jesus do when he dealt with children? On one occasion, he said, suffer the little children to come to me and forbid them not, for such is the kingdom of heaven. On another occasion, he said, if anybody offends a little one that was brought or came in his name, it were better for that person that a millstone were hanged about their necks, that they were cast in the depths of the sea. On another occasion, he said, except you be converted and come as a little child, you can't even see the kingdom of God. Jesus based the humility and the childlike simplicity of salvation on coming as a child. A child was a metaphor, the heart and the spirit of a child. And when I thought about that, it created an ecclesiastical quandary for me, because our church says this, theology says this is how we've always done it. But this is a baby. I had to ask myself the question, when you bless a baby who's living in a home where they have two mothers, is that endorsing or condoning the marriage? I'm just asking questions. This is not about right and wrong. I had to process these in my mind. This is not about me trying to castigate, condone, or condemn. I had to ask myself the question, is praying for a baby condoning a marriage? If a baby is sick in the Gaza Strip, and I'm a Jew, and a Palestinian baby has his arm blown off, is praying for a baby anti-human or anti-Jewish? Does it perpetuate the war? Is praying for the baby? When did praying for a baby become inhumane and anti-Christ? To further add, for those who feel, well, this child's going to be born in confusion. A child with two parents, two men, two women. Even if that's your belief, if you believe that child was going to be born in confusion, don't you think that child should be prayed for more than anybody else, if that's your thought? When you think about the whole issue of adoptions, I've been involved in working with adoption agencies now for the past 20 years. So many children in foster homes are being adopted in same gender families because those of us who raise the banner of this heteropatriarchal normative are not involved in adoptions. So is it better for a child to spend their life adopted, going from pillar to post, and have somebody who's... I'm just asking a question here. For those of us who are so visceral and vociferous in our responses. And so for me, how we handle that situation was inappropriate. This had nothing to do with the couple or the wedding. This had something to do with a 2-year-old baby who was a gift from God, who needed prayer just like the child with heterosexual parents, just like the child with a single mother, just like the Palestinian baby, just like the baby in Kiev in Ukraine, just like the baby in South Africa. What would Jesus do? And for me to have 30 people to drive here, but for us to say we're not going to dedicate a child, not marry a couple, but dedicate a baby. For me, for my conviction, this is me speaking about my conviction. Dewey Smith, you can believe what you want to believe. I felt that what we did was anti-Christ. This is not a political statement. This is not to get members. God has blessed me to pastor thousands of people in my 20s. I give a rat's behind about members. It's about trying to do the right thing and to ask myself, am I representing Christ? Every Sunday, Jesus couldn't be in this church, so he sent me to represent him. Were my actions, were the actions of our ministry at that time indicative of what he would do? And so we reached out to that mother to offer our apologies, to let her know that if she felt us worthy, because I felt her email was, she was broken, she was hurt. And there's no such thing as just homosexual hurt, a heterosexual hurt, a black hurt, a white hurt, a male hurt, a female hurt, a Republican hurt, a Democratic hurt, a Green Party hurt, a Libertarian hurt. Hurt is hurt. And I felt like we caused harm and hurt to that family. And I felt like the right thing for us to do was offer an apology and to ask her, if she would give us an opportunity and we would come and pray for the child. She didn't choose to do that, but I felt it was our responsibility to do that. Well, of course, when people heard me offer the apology, because she came back to church a few months later, hadn't been over a year when she came back, and she was just grateful for our response. And of course, saints, many who followed my ministry, thought I was wrong, and they turned against me and thought I was doing something that was contrary to the will of God. But I had to work out my own soul salvation and my own theology and do what I felt that God would have me to do. And again, this is not about condoning or condemning anybody. Because though we speak with the tongues of men and angels and have not love, we're just sounding brass and tinkling cymbals. And there is not one passage in the Bible that says I should not pray for a baby, regardless of the circumstance of the situation. You know, David had a child with Bathsheba after killing her husband Uriah and basically in rape culture taking her, he impregnated her, and that child got sick. And the Bible says that he prayed for that child. So what's the difference between David praying for a child that was conceived in adultery and me praying for a child who was living with two mothers? So for me, the issue was the child, not the parents. For me, the issue was Jesus, not the theological presuppositions or the public policy preferences that allowed that same couple to be married. I had to see Jesus in that. And for me, our actions didn't represent Jesus. And for those who disagree, I love you. And I hope you love me. And I hope one day we stand before God and we get clarity. But I'm at peace with the decision we made. I feel we did the right thing. Well, you know, it's interesting. I grew up, my father and grandfather were Baptist preachers. My mother's family was Apostolic Overcoming Wholeness Incorporated. And I was a Church of God in Christ musician. And being raised in Georgia, in the South, particularly in Pentecostal settings, a lot of vitriolic and toxic theological things, a lot of humiliation took place. Sometimes when you're in prophetic ministry, as anybody who knows anything about Pentecostal church, sometimes the meanest folk in the world can be holding this in Pentecostal. And we who grew up in the Pentecostal church and Baptist church and traditional churches, that was a certain way in which we looked at those who are part of the LGBT community. When I played ball as a musician, I remember sometimes my father put a guitar in my hand at 3 and a piano in my hand at 5. And I remember being young and going to piano lessons and how sometimes my friends would make me feel because I was going to piano lessons. And the thought process as a 10-year-old of playing the piano and what that meant to them. And my love for music was influenced by that because real men play the drums, not the piano. So even my musicianship, which was natural, sometimes in their estimation was effeminized and kind of painted with a scarlet letter. Even though I came out the womb loving ladies, and I've loved them all of my life, and God made anything better than a lady, he kept it for himself. But there was this whole idea about gay people and gay men, and we would shun them. I remember, you know, guys picking on people who were gay. Nobody wanted to hang around a gay person, not in high school. You didn't talk about that. You didn't do that. And so although I grew up in the church, I was too blind to see all the gifts that come to the church musically. I went to Morehouse College. I shop in Lenox Mall. Now I live in Atlanta. So my theology was shaped in a lot of ways by the hateful rhetoric of my upbringing. And I never shall forget early on in my pastorate, one of my friends, his sons was raped. He was 11 years old at the time, was raped by his piano teacher, and the guy went to jail for almost over 20 years. And I remember preaching that following week a sermon called GPO. I use a pejorative, get the P out of the church. That sermon was based in ignorance and rooted in harm and hateful speech. Nothing about it was like Jesus. And the more I spoke and the more I preached and the more raunchy my language and the more hateful my language, the louder the response. I grew up when they would call women who were gay certain names, you know, certain pejoratives and so I grew up with that. That was customary. It was normal. So I came to Morehouse College. I started pastoring my sophomore year, and then it was almost don't ask, don't tell. You know, you saw them, you choose who to be around. But at the same time, I wasn't a fool. I realized as a musician, all of the beauty and all of the great contributions that have come from people who, although I'm a heterosexual male, where would our country be without the contributions? I'm just speaking contributions and the gifts. I'm talking from civil rights to music to art. And so there was always this kind of dichotomy there, but yet rooted in the spirituality of divisiveness. And so as I began to pastor and grow and saw people having real issues, going to the hospitals and seeing young girls who slit their wrists because of their struggles with their sexuality who were caught by their parents. And after having those innumerable things where people are wondering, and then wondering, well, what is the ministry? What is my theology? What am I preaching? So sometimes, like most people, just stay away from it. Because if you preach on the subject, if you say something negatively, or something that seems like it's against, you hurt people. If you say something that represents the humanity and accepts the humanity of an individual, then you're pro-gay or you must be gay yourself. So a lot of pastors like me, particularly heterosexual pastors, we don't want to talk about this subject because I don't want to be labeled as being pro-gay. And then some of us are not nuanced enough to even have a freaking conversation. So we just kind of vote all together. But my world and my theology really was rocked to its core when I found out something about my youth pastor growing up. He's one of the first preachers I knew who had a love for music and ministry. We were watching him play and teach, sing. He became a pastor, moved out of Macon, Georgia, and moved away and became a pastor of his own church. Incredible preacher, incredible singer. He never got married. Had a series of beautiful ladies that we thought he would date and marry, never married. And inevitably, he ended up getting on drugs. Lost his church, moved back home with his mother, was living on the bridge, trying to get himself together. And I discovered in recent years that when he was born in the 50s in Macon, Georgia, he was born intersex, which means he was born with both organs. Many people don't know biologically, when we're born, we're all born the same. Baby boys and baby girls have the same genitals, and then it develops later, but originally it's all the same. Well, he was intersex. He had a male organ and a female organ at the same time in the 50s. So imagine that. No internet, impoverished community. Who's talking about intersex? They used to use the word hermaphrodite, which is I'm told is an ugly word now. It's a pejorative term, but now the correct term is intersex. His father decided that he wanted to have a baby boy. So his father made the decision in 1956, I believe, 57, 55 or 56, I want to have a baby boy. And so they performed all of the surgeries there to make him a baby boy. Later, it's discovered that if somebody's born intersex, it's probably more favorable or preferable or maybe easier if they are going to do something surgical for them to be made a young lady. That's what they say the preference is. A young lady who was a South African runner a few years ago was stripped from running in the Olympics because her testosterone levels were higher. Her father says, she's always been my baby girl. She's going to remain my baby girl. And that rocked me because it made me wonder, because all my life I've been told, well, you weren't born that way. And if you were born that way, now it's time to be born again. Well, that was my fundamental perspective. You're not born that way. You're born male or female. Well, even science now tells us that there's certain people who have different mutations. It's been said that one out of every 100 people, that maybe one may have some type of sexual chromosomal abnormality, right? There's a bit of deviation over those numbers, but from 1 in 100 to 1 in 1,000. So which means if I'm preaching to 5,000 people, 5 people in that congregation could be intersex. It could be more if it's 1 of 100. So what do you say to those people? What chapter and verse do you say to those people? So it made me think from a biological perspective about my theology. What do you say if I want to humanize and see the humanity in all people? And it was at that moment when God says, maybe your GPO sermon and the vitriolic way in which you were brought up, and even though I didn't do this all the time, because on the other end of that spectrum, I know a lot of preachers who all they preach about is gay bashing. And I've learned out of 37 years of preaching that if every sermon is a gay bashing, a lot of times the one who's a gay basher is struggling with gayness himself or herself. That's another sermon for another day. So this is not about my personal desire to have anything for me. This doesn't benefit me. This doesn't enhance my ministry to preach about something that causes such a backlash. It's to get it right because people are hurting, right? What I will say is I realize that if I'm going to have love, if I'm going to preach it the way Jesus preached it and see people how Jesus saw them, then maybe my theology needs to be shapen. Maybe my love ethic, because everything is not black and white. Everything may not be as binary as we try to make it be. And sometimes faith has such an antagonism towards science. It's been that way for forever, that we don't even think about the scientific discoveries and ways in which people live. And we try to even superimpose and transpose our faith over things that are even scientific. And so for me, it made me more sensitive to realize that there are people who are struggling. There are parents who have children who are struggling with this issue. And me getting up, insulting them. How many people did I wound over the years with sermons that dehumanized? How many people did I demonize in my preaching because of what they may have experienced or what their issues may be or where they were in their life? How many people did I demonize? I don't know. But that thought is sobering. And so for me, I just want to lead with a place of love and realize that if I demonstrate my faith and preach Jesus, but I got to leave the reality that God's going to be our final judge. Preach, teach, share your faith, but I'm not the final judge. God is. 2 years ago, short after we came back for public worship after the pandemic, a young man drove from South Fulton to our church. He was going through some things in life, heard about the church, and came for worship. When he came to worship, he had a hat on and was told when he came into the church that he could worship with us, but the hat had to be removed in order for him to worship with us. He told the ushers that he was not aware that was a dress code. He was just going through some things in life. He was not able to get his hair cut, and could he just worship for the day, and he would know next time to get his hair cut before he would come to worship. He sat down. A few minutes later, another usher came and asked him to remove his hat. Then another usher came to ask him, and then 3 people came to ask him, told him that if he would remove his hat, he would have to leave. He left in his brokenness, went and wrote a review on one of the social sites, review sites, talking about how just devastated he was to basically be told to leave unless you remove the hat. Again, it made me realize how we have wounded people in the name of theology. We wound people in the name of Jesus. We're more concerned about sometimes clothes than souls. And we tell people to come as you are, just as you are, but then when they get here, we're more concerned about what they have on their head than them having peace in their head. And we've reached out because, again, that's when we've identified people we've wounded. So this month, step 8 on our 12 steps to better is identify the wounded, to make a list of people that we've hurt. We've challenged our members to do that as individuals, but I'm also challenged for us to do it as an institution. How many people have we hurt in the name of God? Because we didn't represent Christ the right way. Not because of truth or not because of something that we're trying to do that was proper, decent, or in order, because people can get so offended, but we had a legitimate moment when we hurt people because we didn't handle things the correct way. And so we're trying to identify the wounded and correct those issues. And so we do annual surveys where people share questions and ask questions, and we try to answer those questions. And last week we were talking about, have we identified people? Because we try to impose and center our perspectives or our beliefs, our theology, or our preferences into their lives. And I talked about how sometimes even parents have fallen out with their children because a young lady is dating a man who the mother does not approve of. Dr. Mitchell, our executive pastor, talked about that. And I also mentioned that sometimes even there are challenges because we have these questions, so many of them. Parents are asking, what do I do? How do I relate to my child who is in a same gender relationship? We've had deacons who have disowned their children over this issue, and they don't know what to do because these are things we don't talk about. And so we dealt with this last week, and the whole premise was you can't center your perspective. You can't force somebody to believe what you believe. You can preach your faith, you can demonstrate your faith, you can teach your faith, but I also know that we would never have total agreement on this. What I realize now is Christianity is not monolithic. People have varying beliefs, and that's not going to change because we see through a glass darkly. What I do believe, however, is that you can preach what you believe, teach what you believe, because we got personal theology and public policy. But I don't believe that we can force people to believe what we believe. Everybody doesn't have to believe, and that's very simple. And I made a statement that I think that parents should do what they can. If they have a child who's made a decision, I don't believe what you believe, Mom. Should that parent disown that child like we see so many do? And we've had questions about that. My whole contention, again, is not to condone or condemn. It's not about my belief. It's about how do you maintain and have a relationship with a child where this situation doesn't divide them. And people say, well, they're going to hell. Well, that's God's job. Well, the wrath of God is coming. They're going to burn in a lake of fire. Well, how about give them some water now in the meantime? At the end of the day, that's God's decision, not yours. We can preach, teach, model, but you can't force people to believe what you believe. And if God's going to send them to hell, let God do that. If that's what you believe, well, won't you give them heaven? If you believe they're going to hell, won't you give them some heaven while on earth? God never told us to send people to hell. He said, with love and kindness have I drawn thee. And so my whole thing was to challenge people not to accept something, not to condone something, but also to meet people like God met us. It's not about silencing your voice. People say, are you trying to No, speak, teach, preach what you want to preach, but you can't force anybody to believe what you believe. And when those situations occur, what do you do? And if you don't believe that a parent can have a relationship with a child who's in the same gender relationship, then what suggestions do you have? Because we're trying to answer questions because these are questions that we've been given. And so I think sometimes we wounded people because we go by what we've heard or our traditions, but what would God have you to do in that situation? And for me, I'm grateful that his mercies are new every morning, that he loves me in spite of me. And guess what? He loves you in spite of you. And listen, if that's something that I've ever said that may have offended someone, I hope that particularly on this subject matter, that it sheds more clarity, more insight. Because I really believe that we all have to stand before God to give account of everything that we've done, everything that we've said. And whether somebody believes like I believe or not, I have to stand and give an account for what I do, just like you will. And I want you to know that I believe for me, this is Dewey Smith, that Christ is the one who's going to meet us in those days. Christ is the one who can make a difference in your life. And maybe you're struggling with something. This has nothing to do with sexuality. It could be about life, finances, relationships, your health, peace of mind, what's happening in the government. I believe that the government is still going to be upon his shoulders. And if you're watching right now, you've never accepted Christ as your Lord and your Savior. His mercies are new every morning. And he died, Christ did for all of us. And if you want to connect with us, you can text the word connect. If you want to be baptized, accept Christ, or you want to get more information about walking with the Lord, you can text the word connect to 678-201-1351. Listen, if you want prayer, our prayer team is standing by right now. Just text that word connect to 678-201-1351. Or if you just like to give and sow into this place because we're trying to sow love. You want to give, if you're a member, you were not his son to give your tithes and offerings, and you want to give the ways you can give right now on the screen. Your support means the world to us. You can give by Zelle, PayPal, all that is mentioned right there. Help us continue to spread the message of Christ so people can identify and know that the life of God is better in every way, every day. What we're trying to do this month is identify the wounded, not talk about who hurt us, but who have we hurt? And maybe love can be the thing that's key that brings about reconciliation and redemption. You know why it's possible? Because God did it for us through Jesus on the cross. My time is far spent. Gotta leave you now, but as always, remember this. If you'll be good to God, God will be good to you. I love you. Identify the wounded. Lead with love. Peace.